Welcome to this afternoon conversation with a very special guest we have with us, the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs, the Government of Netherlands. He has been very kind to give us his time for a conversation on Europe, on changing global order, on India-EU relations, and India-Netherlands relations. So we have a wide canvas to cover this afternoon. Let me begin, Your Excellency, first by welcoming you to the Raisina dialogue. Welcome once again, and ask you if you can briefly lay the first important issue. Of course, we have to start with Ukraine, and your assessment as to what kind of a conflict this has been so far, and where do you see this conflict going? We have entered into the third month of this conflict. What is your assessment, and where do you think this crisis takes us and takes Europe in terms of the geopolitical architecture that is being constructed?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me here today. I think it is a fantastic opportunity to be back in India and to work closely together here also at this conference with my Indian counterpart, who is a great friend and colleague. And it is very timely to have this dialogue on what is going on in the world. And as you have rightfully asked, the number 1, 2, and 3 issue on each and every meeting that I'm having with colleagues in the European Union, but also in North America, is about Ukraine. It is hard to basically to articulate how deeply it is felt in the European Union, in Europe, what currently is going on in Ukraine. It is a devastating war. It is a clear breach of everything we have learned and agreed to in terms of international law. We see the most horrific images, women being raped, children being murdered, cities being sheltered, really devastating images that are that should be put in front of a judge at some point in time. And for us, mentally, this also means a lot. Clearly, we stand shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine. Clearly, we deeply admire their willingness and ability to defend literally city for city, street for street, and defend their own country. But for us, it also means that not only do we want to stand shoulder to shoulder, this actually means that war is back on the European continent. And war is back with vengeance at a scale that we haven't seen since the end of the Second World War. So what we are doing as European countries and with our North American friends is helping Ukraine. First and foremost, individual countries like the Netherlands are providing Ukraine with weapons. Because the reality simply is that if we want to help them at the negotiation table, they need to be as strong as possible on the battlefield. Secondly, as I'm sure many in the audience know, the European Union, together with the British and the Canadians and the Americans, have agreed on a very significant package of sanctions to make sure that this is felt in Moscow and beyond. Third, we do want to make sure we bring those responsible to justice. And we know this is a long road. We know this probably takes years, but it is imperative because it says something about where we stand as an international community. And then fourth, we're trying to do our utmost to help those fleeing Ukraine, helping with humanitarian aid, helping with economic aid. But this has changed the world. This has changed the geopolitical order in Europe. It recreates, or it puts back on the map the importance of Europe as a geopolitical player, not only an economic player. But we have only seen the beginning of this and how this will shape world events in the years to come. So a bit of a long answer, but a topic very close, I think, to all of us today.
Thank you, Minister. And you rightly point out in terms of this war at least bringing Europe back as a geopolitical actor. I would just say that perhaps China's rise and the developments in the Indo-Pacific also allowed European Union to articulate a more geopolitical response, as we have seen in the last few years with the EU's Indo-Pacific strategy. Of course, Netherlands was one of the first countries to articulate that. So if you can contextualize the China debate, the China question, the changing balance of power in the Indo-Pacific, and what it means for Europe to be responding to that challenge in the contemporary geopolitical environment.
Well, what we unfortunately see is that the world order with multilateral institutions, with territorial integrity, with the rule of law is in multiple ways under threat. And clearly what we see with this devastating war that Russia is waging in Ukraine, we see the most clear and most dangerous example of it. But we also see increasingly that countries are challenging European Union, are challenging European individual countries through trade, sometimes through espionage, sometimes through cyber attacks. And therefore, I think it is imperative that the European Union, which is an economic superpower, also makes sure that it steps up its ability to translate that economic might into geopolitical power. And a safe and secure and stable Indo-Pacific is of clear interest, of course, to India and to all the ASEAN partners and the others in the region. But it is also of clear importance to Europe and the rest of the world. And that is the reason why we have embarked with the European Union and our friends in India and our friends across Asia on this Indo-Pacific strategy. We need to make sure that the rule of law is applied here, that countries and vessels and what have you are safe and secure when they're using the waters in the Indo-Pacific and beyond.
So, Minister, when you say, when we talk of a lot of these disruptive forces across the world, the changing balance of power across the, across Indo-Pacific, across Eurasia, we are also looking at its impact being felt on global multilateral institutions. Netherlands has been a big votary of multilateralism in global politics, but there is a sense that the multilateral order is crumbling and something needs to be done about it. But it's not entirely clear what the consensus is, but certainly the idea that the extant multilateral order is not fit enough for purpose. So when you look, someone who has advocated, or your country has been a big advocate of liberal multilateral institutions, where do you think effort needs to be put in, and how do you think a new phase can be crafted in this endeavor?
Well, to me, it is crystal clear that for peace-loving nations, who seek stability, who seek security, who are democratic, countries of the size of India, but also, of course, much smaller, like the Netherlands. And many of our other friends in the European Union, there is a clear incentive to uphold these institutions and make sure that multilateralism prospers. Because having these diplomatic ties, working together, having trade relationships is something we could truly benefit all from. But you are very right, multilateral institutions and multilateralism in itself has come under attack in the last couple of years. And what we need to do is push back against the pushback. Because these institutions, they are, like all immortals, they are not without faults, but they are the best we have. So where necessary, let's make sure that they become fit for the 21st century, but let's defend them. Let's defend them and let's make sure they can play the role in the world that they have to play. Be it the UN, be it the IMF, be it the World Bank, be it all the other multilateral institutions. Again, they're not perfect. They're headed by humans. Sometimes they were in a change process themselves as well. But if we wouldn't have them, we would create them tomorrow.
And so, if I can push you along this direction and ask you to examine the landscape, in Europe, in terms of institutions. You have two major institutions like NATO and European Union. European Union has had some trouble recently, and of course NATO is now getting a new lease of life, if I may say, under Russian assault. So there are challenges in the European landscape, which has always been a leader in articulating an institutional response to global problems. So when you think of NATO and European Union, as institutions and their future in the contemporary context. What are some of the salient things that you'd be able to articulate?
Well, the interesting thing that we have seen is that, particularly in this war, in this crisis, those two institutions, NATO and the EU, have worked together seamlessly. And just to articulate how that goes in practice, in many of the weeks, I first had a NATO meeting, and at that NATO meeting, Sweden was present, and Finland was present, and the High Commissioner of the High Representative, I should say, of the European Union was present. So all three, not part of the NATO domain, but taking part in the meeting. And then later that week, I would have a European Union Foreign Affairs Minister meeting. And there we would have our friends from Norway, not an EU member state. There we would have our friends from Great Britain, Canada, and the United States. They would take part in that meeting, also to signal that we are dead serious about making sure that Europe basically stands on two legs. One is NATO, and the other is the European Union. And yes, they have different roles to play in life, but particularly when they work together, they manage to cover the whole terrain, being it the strict military stuff, which is clearly for NATO, being it the clear economic stuff, which is for the European Union, but also the terrain in the middle, which is about geopolitics, and which is about making sure you are sufficiently assertive when others are assertive.
So I have to ask you this question about NATO. There is a lot of debate around the question of Ukraine, and how would you respond to this question that there is NATO's expansion is also partly responsible for the crisis that we are witnessing around Russian periphery?
Well, what you see is that what the Russian leadership has done is completely unjustifiable. It is absolutely horrific, and in some ways it is creating the exact opposite results of what it has sought. There is now a very lively discussion about whether Finland should become a NATO member, whether Sweden should become a NATO member. As I said, they're taking part in these meetings already. That clearly cannot have been the strategic objective of Vladimir Putin, and still it is happening. Whether they will eventually join is first of all up to them. It is up to them, and then it is up to the other member states. But what I have always said is that from the Netherlands, if they would have this desire, we'll take an open look into this.
Related question on the global order, Minister, is about what is happening to the nature of economic globalization.
Yeah.
There's a lot of debate about globalization in reverse. There's a debate about strategic decoupling, economic decoupling happening in world capitals. When you look at the advantages that globalization has bestowed on the world, and you look at contemporary challenges, is there something that comes out to you? How do you manage this trend? Are there frameworks available, or are we still getting used to this idea that supply chains have to be restructured, that the older framework of globalization of the 1990s, which percolated down, needs some mending, needs some effort in terms of redefining or remapping out its priorities and its challenges?
I'm sure you will see some redefining, and I'm sure you will see some changes in some value chains and also in some trade partnerships. Yet I would tend to agree with those who say that the longer term trend is still one of increased global cooperation, because it is beneficial. If I look at the fantastic trade relationship that the Netherlands has with India, there is and knowing that there is ample opportunity to make that even better in the domain of innovation, in the domain of water, in the domain of agriculture. Nothing is holding us back. So there, the overarching trend, I think, is a positive one. The one thing, though, that we do have to acknowledge is that even a global community that works together very intensively doesn't guarantee safety and security for eternity. That is one of the lessons that unfortunately we're now learning the hard way again in Ukraine. It is not the case that if there are intensive trade relationships, you will never have again a geopolitical conflict.
So last few minutes, Minister, and you have touched upon India and Netherlands. How do you see the relationship moving? Of course, we are celebrating 75 years of the diplomatic ties between the two countries. But what are the axes around which this relationship is now evolving?
Yeah, well, first of all, from a personal perspective, I'm truly delighted to be back. I think India is a truly fantastic friend and partner on an amazing trajectory and with fantastic success in the years that are behind us, and I'm sure also in the years that are ahead of us. And as the largest democracy on earth, I think it is a country that also has a lot to offer, not only to the region, but also to the world at large. What I'm very proud of, I'm delighted to share here, is that the relationship with the Netherlands is also as strong as ever. And you're very right, 75 years of bilateral ties. We were amongst the first here 75 years ago who saw what India was up to, and were very positive about that. We have the largest Indian diaspora of the whole European Union in the Netherlands, and we're truly very proud of the Indian entrepreneurs who work for Philips, who work for ASML, who work for many of the tech companies. And of course, there is a great relationship in terms of trade at large. We're very substantial, I think top 5 investors vis-à-vis. And you know, there is a lot that we do already in the domain of innovation, in the domain of agriculture, in the domain of water, and many other aspects that touch upon the lives of our citizens, that basically make life better. Yet there's also a lot of opportunity left on the table. And I think, you know, our task is to make sure that we further enhance government relationships, which are truly excellent. But you know, there's always more that we can do to further enhance trade relationships and relationships between the fantastic entrepreneurs that India has. But we also have a fairly well-established community of entrepreneurs and a huge tradition of trading with the world. And that touches upon all the domains that I just mentioned. There's opportunity to do more. And what I would also like to say is, or what I would also like to see is that next to this bilateral relationship, that is already fantastic, we make sure that, you know, within the next year, we make sure that the trade relationship between the European Union, of which we are one of the players, of course, and India, we take that to a next level as well. Because the European Union and India have a lot in common, have a lot to learn and from each other and give to each other, and there's much more that we can make out of that relationship.
Yes, and I was about to come to how do you embed the bilateral relationship in the larger EU framework, and I think you have answered that. But you know, if we go to some of the points that we were discussing earlier in terms of the Indo-Pacific, and EU, of course, Netherlands had an Indo-Pacific strategy. EU then came out with its Indo-Pacific strategy, and that had become a point of convergence for India and EU, India and Netherlands. What opportunities do you see beyond the bilateral when you look at the larger Indo-Pacific landscape?
Well, first of all, there is, you know, we truly cherish this decades-old friendship with India, and the relationship that is so strong and so prosperous. Yet let's also be fair. India is a country of 1.3, 1.4 billion, and it grows every year with more than the entire size of the Netherlands. That is part of the reality as well. And what I'm very keen on is establishing, of course, further working on this fantastic bilateral relationship, but also making sure that the whole European Union, the European Union at large, which has tremendous potential also for India, Europe for India and India for Europe, that we make sure that we further enhance these ties. And there is ample economic opportunity, because if you just think of the great trade relationship that we have bilaterally, how would it be if we would be able to create it with more of the countries of the European Union? But we also very much like-minded on stuff like the rule of law, respecting the geographical integrity of other countries, multilateralism, the inherent value of democracy. And these are values shared by the European Union. They are front and center in each and every of the European Union member states, but also for India. And therefore it makes all the sense in the world to make sure that as continents we also team up in the Indo-Pacific, but if you would ask me, also more at a global scale.
And our president was in Netherlands recently, and he talked about the three. He coined it as WA, water, agriculture, and horticulture. I was wondering if when you look at India-Netherlands ties in substantive terms, in economic terms that you mentioned, are these research and innovation, is this being explored to the potential that it has, or much of your work this time during your visit is about harnessing that potential?
I think the honest answer is that we can always do more, and the domain of innovation is huge. The potential is huge. We have a couple of great companies. As I mentioned, ASML, ASMI, Philips, that are, amongst the front runners in innovation worldwide. Yet, if you think about the tremendous potential of the domain of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and all the opportunities that there are, and as a third bucket, you think about the vast potential of talents that India has, the number of engineers that you are establishing year on year on year, and you make sure that we wave this all together. We make sure that we bring these three things together, and then the opportunity is tremendous. So, are we on the right track? I think absolutely. Is there more to be explored and more to do? For sure.
So Minister, just as we end this conversation, what would be three things that you would like India and European Union or India and Netherlands to focus on as we move towards the next 75 years? So
the next 75 years. You know that a week is a long time in politics. So
next decade.
So 75 years is a bit of an overstretch, but I'm delighted to be here again in another 75 years. No, it's the president, and we were honored and privileged to have him during the state visit a couple of weeks ago. Clearly mentioned a couple of things that should be on that list. Water is of tremendous importance to India and the Netherlands, and also to Europe at large. And unfortunately, both India and the Netherlands know, on the one hand, the inherent value and the necessity of water, but also have been on the receiving end. The saying in the Netherlands is, the sea gives and the sea takes. So we also need to protect ourselves against water. And we learned that the hard way. We also build expertise, and if there can be more, if we can do more to protect our citizens also in India, I would be delighted to do so. So water is one, and I very much agree with what the President said on agriculture as well. We are the second largest exporter of agriculture after the United States in the world, and we will be delighted to further enhance this also with India. And then I think the third economic pillar that I would mention is clearly innovation. If we think about what the current generation, but also the future generation, the kids that are now in school, what they will in what way they will be making a living of, that will be in many cases linked to the domain of innovation. The world is changing at a speed that we haven't seen before. If I see the tech savviness of my kids, and they are between 6 and 12, there's a lot that I'm never going to learn that they already know, and I think that is true for many of the people of our generation. So innovation, machine learning, artificial intelligence. I think there is tremendous potential. And then as a last thing, and then I'll stop. This was all linked to the economic domain. There is a clear incentive. There is a clear incentive for the European Union and the Netherlands to work very closely together with India, given all the values that we share, given the geopolitical challenges that we share. So let's make sure we further enhance this cooperation in the decades to come.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for a wonderful conversation, and hopefully I'll be there when you visit after 75 years. So I'll
thank you, Professor. Thank you very much, and thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.